A report came in about people in Shibuya disappearing near a manhole. The whole thing smelled wrong, but Rinko was all too happy to delegate the task to me. I thought it could all just be some stupid prank, but I still went to meet up with a person who got in touch with us. Turns out it was a little kid named Ryota. Perfect. Lucky me, getting to be some kid's gopher on top of being Rinko's errand boy. Anyway, the kid told me about how someone named Sasuke disappeared near a manhole and asked me to go looking for him. At this point, I was thinking Sasuke was the little kid's little brother or something. I mean, why wouldn't I? I found a manhole, and near it, a spirit claiming it had been killed by some kind of monster. Supposedly, they'd been standing right on top of the manhole when it happened. Intrepid guy that I am, I climbed on down. I'd only ever been down into the sewers one other time, back in my days on the Force, and it was just as shitty this time as it was back then. So, once I got down there, I ran into this kid in a yellow raincoat, just hanging out there. Not the first place I'd think to find a lost kid, but I figured it could be Sosuke, so I called out to him, which turned out to be a real bright idea, because it was actually a monster. The thing saw me, blew a whistle, and then a bunch more of them showed up to ruin my day. Thankfully, I took the things down, but next time, I'll go ahead and take care of them before getting noticed, instead of running my mouth. Surprise, surprise, in the end, Sasuke actually did show up, and he was a damn dog. My heart just about stopped when I first spotted him. Thanks, kid. I guess I'm a pet detective now, too. The Dancing Headless Students. Had to look into some social media something or other recently. Apparently, there were a bunch of posts that always go up at a set time of night involving a bunch of students dancing. I asked Erica a couple of times before to explain the whole social networking thing to me, but it's all way over my head. Anyway, the kids in these posts were showing up online without any heads. Knew that shit was bad for society, and there's your proof. Ed and Rinko analysed the pictures and found out that all the kids were from a school in Shibuya. I went to take a look around, and sure enough, I found a bunch of those things. Visitors wearing student uniforms and dancing around like kids. Turns out, they weren't the cause of it at all. It was actually some spectre with an axe to grind about the whole being dead thing. The second the spectre caught sight of me, the dancing visitors were on my ass. One or two I could have handled no problem, but this was a whole bunch of them, all spitting and screaming and throwing rulers and shit at me. Huge hassle. Once I dealt with them, I went after the spectre. When I cornered it, I realised it was spouting a bunch of social media nonsense, stuff about no followers and not having any mentions or DMs. Erica had been listening in, and she told me to try following the spirit's account. She walked me through the process, and it ended up working. After I followed it, the spirit calmed down and let me exercise it. No idea why a spirit would even care about fake internet fame when it was already dead. Maybe all those abandoned accounts are kind of like lingering spirits themselves. The Awakened AI. There was a report of 7 employees working at a startup operating out of Shibuya all disappearing in a single night. Most of the public figured they'd just skip town, but these are the kind of cases that demand our attention. I don't know the first thing about IT stuff, or business, for that matter, so Rinko tagged along when I went to look into it. Rather, let a pro take care of that stuff than try to fumble through it and make a fool out of myself. Rinko's a researcher by trade, and Ed too. They and the guy we're trying to catch used to work together researching spirits and souls and whatnot. I don't understand the details, but they ended up discovering the existence of ether, and the fact that some folks, like me, have an affinity for it. Anyway, the startup we were looking into dealt with research into artificial intelligence. They wanted to make an AI that could outdo a human. As Rinko herself put it, research is a trouble. Bunch of people that don't know how to keep their noses out of where it doesn't belong. Just because they can do something doesn't mean they should. I kind of get the feeling that Rinko was pointing the finger at herself just as much as her fellow researchers, and as well she should, since the whole mess started because of her group's work on the afterlife. We investigated the company's office and ended up finding the AI and switching it on. Sure enough, the thing talked like it had a mind of its own, but it was no AI at all. It was some kind of monster that dragged me into the PC. It was weird as all hell, probably caused by corruption in the area. The monster was swinging a giant pair of scissors around and damn near succeeded in cutting my head right off. My luck held though, and I managed to take it down. I gotta imagine that the missing workers weren't so lucky. Probably all killed. Rinko was dead silent the whole ride back. I think the situation hits kind of close to home for her. I tried to tell her what I thought she needed to hear. Screwing up doesn't mean you're a bad person, as long as you regret your mistakes. The Turbo Student. I caught wind of a story about a school student running along a highway, although probably better to say he wasn't running along the highway so much as tailing cars and motorcycles trying to get them to crash and burn. Definitely smelled like a visitor situation to me. I filled Ed in, and he was thrilled. He said it was similar to another urban legend about a so-called Turbo Grandma. Of course, by said, I mean he had made a recording that he played back for me when I brought it up. No goddamn clue when he did it or how the hell he knew to do it, but whatever. Anyway, he knew that figuring out anything about this turbo student would mean hitting the same speed as him, which had Rinko on board. She got Ed and Dale to put together a souped-up motorcycle for the task. This hog had a beast of an engine on it, and some kind of energy-emitting device that could keep monsters from getting too close to boot. The theory was that it would help her avoid ending up a smear on the pavement with any luck. Rinko ended up driving while I took the back seat. Sure enough, we were speeding along the highway in the dead of night when the turbo student showed up, running like a bat out of hell. Whatever it was, it approached us fast, but I was able to take it down. Though, not without our bike getting trashed. Neither of us got hurt, but I guess putting such a powerful engine on the bike was too much for it. Rinko and Ed still want to fix it up and even upgrade it so it can safely ride through fog, too. For those two, shit like that is hardly work at all. More like playtime. They look like kids in a candy store when they're tinkering. The mystery of the invisible cat. We got a report about people hearing meows coming from a cat no one could actually find. I'll admit it. I figured it was just a stray yowling the way cats do and said we should ignore it. But Erica managed to convince Rinko it was worth looking into. So off we went. The cries had been coming from an abandoned building in the redevelopment zone. I definitely heard a cat meowing, but I couldn't find an actual cat. It wasn't long, though, before Erica uncovered the root of the whole mystery. Turns out, there is a Nurikabe that had been blocking the way into the room where the cat was stuck, so we freed the little guy, and it all works out. Maybe we're all cut out for animal control after all. I have to say, I was impressed. Erica not only convinced the group to look into the business with the cat, she even managed to solve the whole thing herself. It's clear she's getting stronger and more resilient by the day. If you ask me, one of these days in the not-too-distant future, she'll be the one saving our asses, and hey, with her there, I didn't have to actually go near the stupid cat, which is all the reason I need to celebrate. The Cult of the Flying Cloth. Generally, when we finish up a job, we pass copies of my notes on to the clients who hired us. Those notes have apparently been circulating around a bit, and now it sounds like the rumours about our little group are starting to get around as well. I doubt anyone takes them all that seriously, though. The kind of weird stuff we investigate isn't the sort of thing someone just reads about randomly and believes. Or at least, that's what I would have hoped. Take this Cult of the Flying Cloth thing. It's about, wait for it, a flying piece of cloth that scales buildings and flies around in the sky. Some weirdos managed to catch it, and now, naturally, they're worshipping the damn thing. I don't know how people's minds work these days. It's not some mystical piece of fabric, it's a yokai, an itanmomen. Trust me when I tell you, if you come across one of those things, you don't want to kneel down and start singing songs to it or whatever. You want to get away. Nothing good comes from finding an itanmomen. Sports Avenue Barker. I was on Sports Avenue in Shibuya the other day, and there were all these barkers going up just to about every young person in the area trying to draw in some customers to their shops. None of them came near me, though. Probably because they could tell that I'm a detective and I wouldn't put up with their bullshit. But then, one of them did approach me, and it was a Rokurokubi. Now, in my mind, when a lady comes up to you asking for something, you can't just ignore them if you know what's good for you. That goes double when you're talking about a Rokurokubi. Anyway, I tried to chase the thing down, and it gave me a runaround all over the alleys of Shibuya before I managed to corner it. Got myself a Magatama for the trouble, though, which I passed off to Ed and Rinko. The strange case of the Tsuchi Tengu. Seems like the redevelopment work in Shibuya isn't just affecting people, but yokai too. Tengu, for example. You'd normally never see something like that in a city, but lately we've had a whole bunch of them. They're not hurting anybody, so I've just been leaving them alone, but I can't help but wonder if it's a sign of something to come. In any case, seemed like something worth writing down. The Nekomata and a convenience store. I came across a gaggle of strays loafing around outside a convenience store the other day, but something was off about one of them. When I looked closer, I realized it wasn't just a cat, it was a yokai, a Nekomata to be exact. The old yokai tales say that if a normal cat lives long enough, they eventually become a Nekomata. There's actually all kinds of stories like that, with objects and animals turning into yokai if they manage to stick around long enough. I asked Ed about it, and he said that a process might have something to do with the accumulation of ether. Considering my ether affinity gives me the ability to steal power from yokai, I think he might be onto something. Side note, I'm pretty sure Ed likes yokai more than he does other humans.